Hello, my History 125 students. This is your Professor Donald Collins. It is week 4, and I'm talking to you today about um, things going on for the end of week 3 discussion for week 4 um, and going into weeks 4 and 5 as well. Hopefully, this won't take too much time. Week 3 discussion was okay. It wasn't terrible by any stretch. Actually, it was pretty good, pretty decent, but not as good as the first couple of weeks. And that probably has as much as to do with the readings as it does anything else. And the materials that you had for the week 3 readings around the maps, around the printing press. Unfortunately, because of those readings, you really weren't able to get the full flavor of how stuff like map making through mathematical calculations and actually geography and topography became part of European map making, and how the printing press came to be through Johannes Gutenberg in the mid 1450s and 1460. The readings don't really address too much the chain of custody, so to speak, in terms of different cultures and different um, scholars, geniuses, monks from the Byzantines to Arab Muslim world to African Moors to the Chinese to Indians, South Asians slash South Asians, um, doing their work around these issues of printable, movable type and oils and screws and printing presses and maps over the years. It's extremely Eurocentric. I apologize on behalf of my department. I did not, like I have said before from the first week, these are not things that I personally have uh, selected. This is a departmental level decision made by colleagues who are part of committees designing curriculum, deciding what readings to have, what assignments to do, etc., etc. I might have some input here and there, and I think I've let you know so far where I've had that input, and I'll let you know again, but not specifically on that, not at all. So my apologies on behalf of them. As for week 4, you have an assignment due at the end of this week. It's a sourcing assignment. An assignment where you have to look up 3 sources, 3 web-based sources that you will use to do your PowerPoint proposal and presentation that is due at the end of week 7, where you figure out a scientific or technological problem that is at the local or county or state or national or even global level that you want to solve, and you want to figure out what are the best practices around solving, what kind of technological innovation or scientific discovery would be helpful in doing that, right? You want to use some imagination here, but you don't want to go overboard. If you feel like you've discovered the way to turn, literally poop into food, through a matter energy converter, that's great, but there's really no technology around something that specific. So, but if you want to basically, turn Maryland into a place that in which every apartment building has solar paneling for energy and be able to store all that energy, that might be a little bit more realistic and also require some imagination at the same time. So it should be, you have to balance this thing around using your imagination versus, say, being realistic here. So I would keep those in mind. So you really want this week 4 assignment to set up your week 7 assignment. You don't want to do something where you just look up 3 random things and then go and then not be able to use it for week 7 because you just made your life harder. You're reinventing the wheel. Why would you do that? So I'm asking you to do it as designed. Use those week 4 sources to help build your case for whatever you plan on doing for week 7. So you want to be able to write down what the problem is, you want to be able to look up sources, and you want to use the right citation format for you. Even though technically speaking you should be using Chicago style because this is a history course, an HIST course, the fact is the assignment allows you to do any sort of recognizable citation and referencing format. So MLA, Turabian, APA, AP, all of those come into play. I don't expect to see scientific citations and formatting because this is in a science class, but any of the ones I just named probably should work. I mean, APA is pretty much American Psychological Association, Chicago style, of course. You could use that. MLA is the Modern Language Association. Turabian's actually pretty close to Chicago style for a couple minor differences. So AP is the Associated Press. Well, any of those should work for this course. So 250 words is what I expect you to write in terms of setting up, your source material, in terms of an introduction around the problem, so on. And you can use that introduction and slap it into the first, your second page of your PowerPoint, your second slide, as sort of your executive summary, if you will. So, that's the other reason why I want you to go through this reasonably well. If you do this well, you'll have less work to do when it comes to week 7. So, any questions on that, just email me at donald.collins@faculty.umc.edu. I have no idea when they're changing the UMUC to the UMGC regarding emails. They might not. I don't know. Everything's kind of confusing right now around email and Office 365, I'm sure. And if it's confusing for me, I'm pretty sure it is for you guys as well. So anyway, what else? So that's the week 4 assignment. Week 4 itself, weeks 4 and a little bit of week 5, but week 4 in particular is the major transition point in the course. Up to this point, I've been trying to emphasize the fact that Europe is not the end-all and be-all of all scientific and technological discovery for all time and all history. And despite my best efforts, many of you have kind of ignored that by just simply trying to answer the questions as quickly and as possible without really reflecting on the possibility and the probability that you're not completely answering these questions by thinking about context. But now that we're centering more on Europe, you should be able to get the context for Europe, I would hope, at least a little more clearly. And this week is a case in point. This is the week where we're talking a little bit, more than a little bit actually, about really the scientific revolution and the importance of the scientific revolution to the rise of Europe, particularly Western Europe, as a dominant force in scientific and technological change around the world. Now, just because I'm saying the rise doesn't mean it's already there. It's not number 1 yet. It will be by the 18th century, but we're not there yet. It's just starting its rise. Europe is in the 16th and 17th centuries in particular. And the reason why it's able to do that is because some of the things that cause ebb and flow in Europe don't exist anymore. Like, because of the age of discovery, or some people would say the age of exploitation as opposed to exploration, with the Western Hemisphere, there's more food for people to eat. There's more variety of food for people to eat. You don't have to worry, with labor-saving devices and so on, you don't have to worry as much about food, clothing, and shelter as a continent or a subcontinent as Europe had to do prior to this period. That makes it easier for you to have people to do things like, I don't know, contemplate the universe, think about better ways of doing things, be more inventive, be more creative from a scientific and technological standpoint, including being more creative around war. Leonardo da Vinci and all of his gun making comes to mind, for instance. So really, when you start thinking about the period between, say, 1550, you could vary it a little bit. You could really say 1500 if you wanted to about 1675, 1700. That's the period where the scientific revolution takes full hold in Western Europe, while simultaneously the power of the church declines. Now, all of this decline and all of this rise in terms of science versus religion is encapsulated by the discovery that the sun does not revolve around the earth, but rather the earth and all the other heavenly bodies of what we would consider the known universe back then, really the solar system, revolved around the sun. So going from a geocentric model of the universe to a heliocentric model of the universe, which was a big deal in the 17th century, particularly with the Catholic Church. So that's where we are. But there's a larger context to that even. Some of you really noted the fact, and you are right about this part, that the printing press allowed for more people to not really see the church as the end all and be all of all knowledge. And that is true. But what you don't recognize is that one of the key figures in making the printing press basically sort of divorcing it from the church is Martin Luther and his 95 Theses, his protest against the corruption of the Catholic Church for it taking sacraments, taking money for sacraments so that people could buy their way supposedly into heaven. Give us some lira, you bought your spot in heaven kind of stuff that the Catholic Church was selling in order to bring more money in, because popes that were from the Medici family or the Borgia family were using basically the bully pulpit of the Catholic Church to start wars and to conquer territory throughout the Italian peninsula. That's a very, very long story, and there are two whole series about this that have been on places like Stars and HBO over the years, but let's not go there. The bottom line is this: church is corrupt. Martin Luther saw this corruption as a priest and decided that used the printing power of the printing press, went to a printing press and printed his 95 Theses and stamped it on the door of his church, his local church in the middle of what is now Germany, to protest the Catholic Church. And that led to what's known as the Protestant Reformation. See, anybody who's Christian from the Western European, Central European tradition, but is not part of the Catholic Church, is considered someone who's protesting against the church, hence a Protestant, for those of you who do not know this already. So, so when you have the Protestant Reformation, that's all part of this. And so when the church sees folks like Galileo and like Copernicus um, and others who are writing things and who are doing experiments that basically prove some of the church dogma to be incorrect or not quite as accurate as they thought it was, they're not taking this personally simply because they don't believe in science at all. In fact, church is the reason why these people were able to do science at all. People like Kepler. But at the same time, when you count for that full context around the Protestant Reformation, and then when you get to the 17th century, the 30 Years' War between um, troops led by Catholic nations versus troops led by Protestant nations, across Western and Central Europe, with the Catholic Church supplying its own mercenaries and troops as part of that process, then you can understand why the church might be upset when Galileo says that the church dogma was wrong, and then he makes kind of fun of his church through his writings later on. And so the church implements things like the Inquisition to try to scamp this science out. But the power of the printing press, the power of these scientists, and the fact that many of these scientists now lived in Protestant-leaning nations like England and it's now the Netherlands and other places, it meant that those scientific writings, through the power of trade and the printing press, would survive all of this and lead to a revolution in thought and a decline in the church at the same time. That is basically the most, what I can encapsulate in a fairly short period of time, what happened during that period, and that's the context behind it. So it's not just the church just withered away because people stopped believing in God. It's because the church was corrupt. It's because the circumstances around the Protestant Reformation and 30 Years' War, nation building, meant that the church really did have less power over time. Printing press breaking that power in terms of science and technology. Galileo and Copernicus and Isaac Newton and all these other people doing the same. So that's your week 4. We'll do a little bit more of week 5 in terms of that and the Industrial Revolution at the same time.